There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people. And
right. Richard Dawkins, you've talked a lot in terms of religion being a pernicious virus. When you talk in those sort of emotional, quite visceral terms, are you doing that to sort of raise hackles and therefore heighten the debate, do you think?
I don't think I've talked a lot about it being pernicious. I'm not even sure I ever used the word pernicious.
But virus is a word you've
certainly virus. And the point there is really not the pernicious aspect, although I actually think it is pernicious. The point there is that it's infectious. It's something that grips the mind in the same way as a conventional virus, grips the body, in that it takes control, and it does so the better to propagate itself.
But in choosing words like that, or on occasion I've read that you've said you despise organised religion, or religious belief actually, they're very emotive terms for someone from an academic background. Are you doing that because you feel it's in the interests of the cause that you're pursuing, that debate is quite highly charged?
I wonder if they're as emotive as you think they are. I suspect that because we've all been brought up with this sort of culture of respecting religion, that anything comparatively mild sounds more outspoken than it really is. I mean, do you really despise religious belief? I despise people who believe something without evidence and then go out and take action which damages other people. Yes. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people. And there are, of course, many people like that.
But your average devout worshipper who's sitting in a pew of a Sunday morning, you don't despise them.
No, of course I don't, no.
What are your feelings towards them?
Well, I mean, they're harmless, especially Church of England. I mean, they're harmless. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. No, of course I don't despise them.
Here's the thing. I am an agnostic. I have thought about the tenets, certainly, of Christian belief. And as far as believing in God is concerned, sort of found them wanting, or myself unable to be convinced. But I still think I can't possibly know whether God exists or not anymore. I mean, am I being sort of, what's the word? Weak-willed, guilty of not having the courage of my convictions?
No, I mean, I'm an agnostic too in that sense. In the God Delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 was total conviction that there is a God, and 7 is total conviction that there isn't. And I put myself as a 6. Okay, so that's kind of agnostic, but veering towards atheist. And I would be a 6 with respect to fairies and pixies and werewolves and things like that. But there are people who will say, because they're agnostic, that puts them absolutely right in the middle. The probability of there being a God and there not being a God is exactly 50-50. And that, I think, is the wrong sort of agnostic to be, because I think you can sort of put a probability figure on it. You can say, well, I think a God is very unlikely, but I can't actually disprove it. So I'm not a 7. I'm a 6.5 or something like that. And that's where I would put myself.
Dawkins' idea that religion acts like a virus actually lines up with what psychologists see in child development. Kids are wired to trust authority, which makes them easy to indoctrinate. That's why churches baptize babies or push to Sunday school so early. Once the belief spreads, it's carried forward like an infection of the mind. And he's right to despise beliefs that cause harm. History is packed with examples. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch trials, all justified by Scripture. Even in the Bible, Luke 19:27 has Jesus saying, "Bring them here and kill them before me." That verse has been used to excuse violence for centuries. The bigger point is about evidence. Dawkins puts himself at a 6 out of 7 on his scale. Almost certain there's no God, but honest enough to say he can't disprove it absolutely. That's science. You follow the probabilities, and the probabilities aren't close to 50-50. There's no evidence of a global flood, no archaeological proof of Israelites wandering the desert for 40 years, and no DNA evidence tying humans back to Adam and Eve. What we do have is overwhelming proof for evolution, the Big Bang, and genetics. And you see the shift today. Pew Research shows Christianity in the U.S. shrinking fast while the number of people with no religion is climbing. The more people learn the facts, the less they rely on faith.
What about the fact that religion, in terms of its institutional influence, persists? How much does that irritate you? Or
it's weird that those countries that have sort of the trappings of theocracy remaining, like Britain, because we have bishops in the House of Lords, and we have lots and lots of faith schools, and we have the Queen is the head of the Church of England. It's an odd thing that those countries, like Britain, like the Scandinavian countries, which have an established church, seem to be the least religious. And a country like America, which has written into its constitution the separation between church and state, a wall of separation, as Jefferson called it, is one of the most religious countries, the most religious country in the Western world. So there's an odd negative correlation with what you might naively expect.
How do you explain that, do you think?
Well, various explanations have been offered. I mean, one explanation is that in a country like Britain, where religion is part of the establishment, it's become sort of boring. Whereas in America, where there's the wall of separation, religion has become free enterprise. And so you have mega churches with their own television stations, their own creches to look after the children, their own gyms. They've become huge commercial enterprises, tax-free, by the way, which helps, with the televangelists having private Lear jets to jet around in and fleets of posh cars and things.
It's not tea and biscuits.
It's a very, very big business, religion in America, whereas in Britain it's become sort of boring and people don't really take it very seriously one way or the other.
Politics is very reluctant to go anywhere near this. I mean, in terms of the solutions to some of what you're talking about, the only place we can look is to politics. The state has to act. Perhaps things have to be legislated for. And yet, I mean, there was a hell of a fuss when Ed Miliband recently said he was an atheist. There's a sort of, it goes back to what you said before, I think, about not offending religious sensibilities.
Yes.
There's a sort of twitchiness about religion.
I think that's
still.
True. Yeah, I think that is
And then
true.
I suppose my question, given the amount of energy you expend on this issue, how are you aim to get over that? Because it does stand in the way of society achieving the sort of shape that someone like you would like it to achieve.
Yes, and my colleague Dan Dennett coined the phrase belief in belief. Lots and lots of people are not religious themselves, but they've got a vague idea it's a good thing that other people are. It's very patronising and condescending, by the way. It's sort of the attitude, well, you and I, of course, are too intelligent to be religious, but the common people need it. And there are a lot of people who actually think that. A lot of people think that we need religion in order to be moral. There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. I mean, absolutely none. So I think one important thing we've got to do is to prize apart religion from morality. It's absolute nonsense to say that you need religion in order to be moral. And so I think that would be one major step we could take. You don't need to send your child to a faith school in order to instill in that child a sense of morality, a sense of good citizenship.
For whatever reason, even in a secular country like this, we have arrived at a point where there's a sort of latent belief within the popular consciousness that to be scientific is to somehow be sort of desiccated and dry and to miss out on the magic and mystery of one's experiences and the world and so on. You dispute that, right?
So not only dispute it, I mean, it's just the exact opposite of the truth. Science is wonderful. Science is amazing. The fact that you could understand why you exist, who could not be turned on, who could not be excited by that, who would ever want to live in a world where you live your life, you go to work, you go to the office, whatever it is, you go to the football match, and this goes on year after year, and then you die. And you don't have any understanding of why you were there in the first place. That's desiccated, that's dry. What is not dry and desiccated is coming into the world, as it were, awakening in the world, and awakening in the fullest sense of seeing the universe, seeing the stars, seeing down a microscope, seeing what's inside every single cell, seeing what's inside the brain, and marveling at this wonderful gift of life that we have, albeit temporarily, marveling at this gift of understanding why we exist and rejoicing in it for as long as we do exist.
Richard Dawkins, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What Dawkins highlights here is fascinating. Countries like Britain still have official churches, bishops in government, even a monarch as head of the Church of England. Yet they're among the least religious places in the world. Meanwhile, America, which is supposed to separate church and state, has become one of the most religious nations in the West. The difference is simple. In Britain, faith feels like old furniture. In the US, it's a booming business. Megachurches run TV networks, gyms, schools, and do it tax-free while pastors fly in private jets. That's not spirituality, that's enterprise. And Dawkins is right. People still cling to the idea that without religion, society would collapse into chaos. But the data proves the opposite. Secular countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Japan have some of the lowest crime rates and highest levels of social trust. Meanwhile, the US, with all its churches, struggles with mass shootings and inequality. The Bible itself doesn't give us a higher moral ground either. It condones slavery in Ephesians 6:5, and in Numbers 31, Moses commands his followers to kill men, but keep virgin girls as spoils of war. That's not morality, that's barbarism.
I tried to put a case for why we feel altruism, and because of once living in these small villages. And so
yeah, it didn't quite work for me though. Again, Richard, you're taking a particularly impressive and somewhat puzzling aspect of human behavior, radical altruism, the sort of Oskar Schindler who risks his life and ultimately loses it for people he doesn't even know, and saying, well, it's just a misfiring. It doesn't set well with one's sense as a human of how to admire that.
But okay, misfiring doesn't have to have the pejorative connotation that you've put on it. I mean, you could say that the desire to adopt a child. I mean, many people adopt a child. Now, that is a misfiring, but that's not as pejorative. I mean, it's an admirable thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do, but it is a misfiring of the Darwinian impulse to want to rear a child of your own. And that's fine. It's a beautiful thing.
Then why do we admire it?
Well, we have the desire to rear to rear a child for good Darwinian reasons, which you and I would agree with. But then, when a couple cannot have a child, they have that desire. It's like the desire for sex, which you still have the desire even though you're using a contraception. Similarly, you still have the desire for a child, even though you are, for one reason or another, unable to have a child of your own, so you adopt one. Now, that is technically a misfiring, but please don't think that I'm saying anything that pejorative about it. On the contrary, I think it's noble, as I think the sort of Oskar Schindler behavior is extremely noble.
But presumably you believe that the nobility we see in such an act goes beyond just an evolutionary thing. You believe that there's a real right and wrong that exists in the universe that we're kind of seeing and acting upon in that sense.
I do see that, and I am not happy dismissing it on purely materialistic grounds. But those who study sort of what's exceptional about humanity, they always come up with these three characteristics of what it is that we are attached to. One is truth, which at the moment is a little bit underneath fire, at least in my country. Another is goodness. Where does that come from? And the third is beauty, which we touched on, and which I also think can't be dismissed as we're just peahens. We see beauty in equations. We see beauty in music and in a patch of pink in the western sky at sunset, and it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of evolutionary benefit to us, and yet it matters, and it also lifts us in a certain way into a plane of something other than the sort of pure dailiness of our experience, some glimpse of something what Lewis calls joy, where you have just this sense that there's something more, if I could just grasp it, and then as soon as you try, it's gone. And that feels to me like a real significant experience that should not be dismissed as a neurotransmitter that just lost its way.
You keep using words like dismiss. I mean, I don't dismiss it. I exult in it. I mean, it's wonderful. It's beautiful. And the fact that you can give it an explanation is not to dismiss it or demean it or reduce it in some way. Yes, I mean, a sense of beauty, the sense of the enjoyment of Beethoven, it is actually firing of synapses in your brain, but that's not to demean it. It's still wonderful.
And incredibly wonderful. And it's not, Polkinghorne's line comes to mind that beauty is not something we should dismiss as just evolutionary, epiphenomenal froth on the surface of an uncaring universe.
But that's an emotive language again. It's not dismissing, it's not froth, it's wonderful, but it's explicable.
Here, Dawkins continues to explain why we don't need religion to be moral, even in his debate with Francis Collins. Collins points to radical altruism, like Oskar Schindler risking his life for strangers, and suggests that must come from something beyond evolution. But Dawkins shows how these actions fit perfectly within an evolutionary framework. Our instincts for kinship and empathy sometimes misfire outside their original purpose, leading us to adopt children, save strangers, or act selflessly. That doesn't make it less noble. It makes it even more beautiful that morality can grow from natural impulses, not divine command. And history backs this up. Non-religious countries like Sweden and Denmark consistently score among the highest on global measures of generosity, social trust, and human rights, with some of the lowest crime rates in the world. Meanwhile, Scripture often falls short. In Exodus 21, the Bible regulates slavery instead of condemning it. Yet people today recognize slavery as wrong because of human empathy and reason, not because religion told them. Even when it comes to beauty and music, Dawkins is right. Knowing that Beethoven's symphonies move us because of neurons firing in our brains doesn't make the experience less profound. Science explains the how, but the wonder remains. You don't need God to feel awe. In fact, understanding the natural explanation makes it richer. What do you think? Does morality come from religion or from our shared humanity? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.